Thanks everybody for coming. I think in the information that was distributed, my talk title was What Tech Women Really Want, and then I realized that I'm trying to parody the movie What Women Want with the title here. So it's not what we really want, it's what we just want, just plain. So what tech women want is the focus of my talk today, and I already mentioned the movie analogy, with the Paramount Pictures movie of What Women Want. And so this, just to get it out of the way, this is nothing about dating or how to put on makeup or anything or how to get a date. This is really more about understanding the challenges that women face and being able to support ourselves and for those of us in the audience who are male, supporting our female coworkers. And really understanding what kinds of challenges they face that we may not face ourselves. So we're really focusing on understanding the challenges that, specifically challenges that I've observed as a coach. I've coached a lot of technical women, and I've seen some patterns. And so that's my focus today. And I've given this talk several times before, and the last time I gave it was back in September, and the audience was a group of IT coaches, so coaches who do the same work that I do. And they agreed with what I was saying in my talk, but they said, you know what, the points you're making apply to people in general. Maybe not everybody faces the same challenges, but men and women both face these challenges that you're talking about. Maybe women more than men, but this could still be useful for anyone to hear. So just keep that in mind. And what we talk about today, you might be able to find helpful for yourself, but you also may know others or start recognizing other people who have the challenges that we talk about today. So not everybody is going through the same thing, obviously. So before we dive in any further, I just wanted to give you a little background about me, what I do, what coaching is. I am a technical person, or I'm a recovering geek, you might call me. I have a master's in computer science from Princeton. I had an NSF fellowship while I was there, which I walked away from after a year. I left graduate school to teach full-time at the college level. I taught computer science classes for 3 semesters and realized that teaching was not my calling, so it was a valuable experience about where I didn't want to go. And also it meant I didn't want to go through back to grad school and get my doctorate. I went to CNET. I was a senior systems engineer there. I started back before they went public. And I moved from there to iVillage, where I managed their web development staff. So I was at iVillage for about 3 years as well. I left there for consulting work and then ultimately came into coaching, which really ties together what I enjoyed most about teaching and managing. Was it really allows me to focus on one-on-one with people, helping them through whatever they're struggling with. And that's really what I enjoyed most about teaching and managing, and so I feel lucky that I've been able to focus on that as a coach. Okay, I went to NYU. I was actually part of their first graduating class from their coaching certificate program about 3 years ago, and I recently was certified by the International Coaching Federation as a ACC coach. I forget what the A is. It's like associate coach. I focus on coaching emerging leaders. So a lot of coaches, they really want to just focus on the executives, vice president and above, as CIO, CTO. And while I have coached a CTO, I really prefer and usually focus on coaching staff, senior staff, managers, and directors. So more the everyday folks. Because when I became a manager, there was very little support in transitioning from staff to management, and I had a coach, and I found it really valuable, especially when my manager was too busy for me, right? So, I just see that a coach at that level is really, really valuable in helping you get through changes and challenges. So some of my clients are Johnson & Johnson. They have a technology manager leadership development program. And Smith College has an executive education program, which is for women who are transitioning into management, women scientists and engineers. I've been a speaker in different venues. This is maybe the 5th or 6th time I've given this talk, or a version of this talk. I also write articles for IEEE. I brought my first real magazine article. IEEE has a new Women in Engineering magazine, and I actually have a 2-page article on mentoring in it. And this just came out, it says winter. I think it came out late December, early January. So what's coaching? A lot of people aren't really familiar with what coaching is, so let me go over that really briefly. 70% of senior executives do have a coach. It's considered a perk. It's not considered something where you're not performing well, so you need a coach to help you so that you can fix whatever your problems are so you don't get fired. It's not like that most of the time, and that would really be not the kind of coaching I would want to do anyway. What coaching is usually for is development. Leadership development, developing your soft skills technically, or typically for technical people. They come in with very strong technical skills, but now suddenly they need to learn how to influence people or deal with conflict or manage upwards, speak up in meetings, those kinds of things. So even though I have a technical background and I understand the world that you guys are in to some degree, a lot of what I focus on with people is not technical. Coaching is usually done one-on-one. There is some talk about doing some group coaching, but what the new program is that's being rolled out now is one-on-one meetings with the coach and the employee. And those meetings are confidential, and I think that's really the key difference between what you can do with a coach and what you can do with your manager. Because what you say to your coach is not going to suddenly show up on your performance review or be an issue of concern for your manager unless you let them know that. Sorry, the truck elevator is moving. Okay, so when I have been coaching people, things have come up during coaching sessions that they probably would not want to talk to their manager about, or maybe it's even about their manager or how to deal with their manager. Coaching is about helping identify where you want to go, how to get there, what obstacles are in the way, brainstorming about how to get there, questioning assumptions about things that are in your way, or understanding the dynamics of the environment that you live in, which some people in the coaching world call systems. I really take a systems approach because you're not a person in isolation who can control things independently. You really have a lot of interacting dependencies and group behaviors and things that you have to deal with. Coaching is not consulting, it's not therapy, it's not counseling. If it starts going towards a direction of therapy, a good coach should say, okay, I have to stop here and maybe you have to go talk to somebody else. But coaching, for me, it's focused on what you can do to be more productive or work towards your career or professional goals. I'm really focused on work. And sometimes that leads into also what's going on personally, but that's not really the focus. The focus is your development in the workplace. And some people think coaching is not advice. There's some, in the ICF guidelines, you're not supposed to be giving advice. When you're coaching, it's really more about drawing out your thinking and helping facilitate your thinking rather than saying, well, here's what I would do if I were you. Because I'm not you. And you have your own way of doing things. And facilitating your thinking is my goal. It's not like I want every time my client is struggling with something that they need to come ask their coach, what should I do? And then the coach gives advice. You really want to learn a process of questioning and growing and learning that you can take with you, as new learning. All right, any questions so far? No? Okay. So getting back to the talk, the meat of the talk, what tech women want. I'm going to talk about patterns that I've observed, 5 patterns though I will be talking about, and then depending on how much time we have at the end of the talk, I'm going to share some best advice that I've collected from women engineers around the country, both on the Sisters mailing list and also at that Smith College Executive Education Program and an Association for Women in Computing meeting that I went to. I've collected advice from 19 engineers, advice that they thought was the best career advice they'd ever gotten and wanted to pass on to other people. So I've actually written an article about that that's not published yet, but it has the stories, and the stories are really interesting about how they got their advice and how it was useful to them. So, if I have to shortchange that piece, or you're more interested in the details, send me an email and I can send you the article, because I don't have it up on my website yet. Okay. All right, so these are the 5 areas that I'm going to talk about that I have observed technical women struggling with. Not just one. And some of them are things that I struggled with myself and didn't even realize that it was a more general issue until I talked to other women who were having the same issues. And these are things that I saw as a coach and not as a manager. I spent 5 years as a manager, and I thought I was pretty good at it. But there were things that came up in coaching that I know no employee would have ever said to me. And so it was news to me that some of the things that I had struggled with as an employee were similar to what other people were struggling with, because we just never talked about it. Okay. So the first area is the impostor syndrome. Or the imposter phenomenon. It came out, it was coined in the 70s. There's a book about it. But the person, I saw Dr. Valerie Young give a talk about this a few years back, and it really spoke to me. Basically, the imposter phenomenon is that you feel like you're a fake to some degree, that somehow there was some mistake made. For some reason, you aced the interview, you got the job at Google, and now they think you're so smart, but really, you don't think you're so smart, and someday somebody else is going to figure it out and you're going to get fired, or some lesser degree of that sort of feeling of, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can really do this. And it turns out that 70% of people feel this way at one time or another, and that women tend to feel it more than men. And when I gave this talk back last summer up at Smith, they had a room full of 80 women, and I asked them, how many of you have felt this way? And almost everybody raised their hand, and there was this collective gasp, because people said, oh my gosh, I put my hand up, and I thought nobody else was going to put their hand up, and everybody did. And I would have asked here, but I don't know how statistically valid that would be with the group we have here. But and it may be that the culture here at Google, the criteria for being hired here, maybe you don't feel that way. But certainly in that group that I saw last year, it was definitely an issue for people. Okay, so why did I see this also with my clients? Why was it so common? Well, it turns out that one of the big risk factors for feeling this way is if you're in a job that is atypical for your gender. So being an engineer at Google, if you feel that you're really in a minority here, which I believe, I don't know what the statistics are. I know Google works very hard to recruit women, but if you're in a job atypical for your gender, you're more likely than other people to feel this way at times. And then I've worked with people who have 3 or 4 of these criteria, and they're no wonder they feel this way. Okay, so Dr. Young has a website, impostorsyndrome.com, I believe, .org, I forget. And she gives a whole bunch of ways to get over this feeling of imposter syndrome. And so I'm not going to go into detail on them, and you can look them up on her website if you're interested. But this first one here, separating feeling from fact, seems to be one that people really struggle with a lot. Something happens, and you get worried about it, and you maybe blow something out of proportion, or you read too much into something that was just an innocent comment or a mistake. And it gets, you can have emotional ties to things, and your buttons get pushed. So what that reminded me of is this thing called, this Q-tip story that I heard a few years back. And it goes like this. There's a senior woman in the Coast Guard, goes to the Coast Guard Academy graduation, and she takes the women aside and she gives them all a Q-tip. And she says, when something happens out there that really bugs you, and the guy says something, offensive to you, or that you are offended by, just think of this Q-tip and quit taking it personally, QTIP, quit taking it personally. the job is rough, it's part of the culture, and most of the time if something offends you, it's not personal, it's part of the job, or it's just part of the way the organization works. And it feels better not to think, oh, that guy doesn't like me. It's not personal, it's just part of the job, that he would have said that to anybody. Okay, so other things are being optimistic, trying to find new ways of doing things, rewarding yourself when you do things well. Okay. Now, when I gave the previous slide in talks before, people said, well, you know, Q-tip sounds like a good idea, but how do you really do it? I mean, how do you really stop things from eating away at you if something's bothering you? And so I came up with this slide. It's really just a series of questions that you can ask yourself to help determine how valid or how useful whatever incident occurred is to you. So I have an example that I like to give with this. When I first started programming, this was before CNET, at a company's name I won't mention, my manager was kind of a character. And you know, I had my master's, I taught computer science, and he was self-taught. I came in to work for him, and he said, well, you know, I don't care if you have your master's, it doesn't mean you can program. I can teach a monkey to program. I'm that good of a manager. And I thought, gee, did that guy just call me a monkey? You know, and I'd be offended? Is this guy really like writing me off? And so, you know, I wasn't sure how to think about this. So, you know, if I take that scenario and go through these questions, well, does he really know me and my skill set? Well, he just hired me. I'd only been there a couple weeks. He didn't really know. He hadn't seen me succeed on the job or accomplish much yet. Was this a one-time occurrence? He kept, I mean, it was like it was a pet phrase of his. I would say, no, it wasn't a one-time occurrence. So there could have been an issue there. Does the person do this with others like you? Well, it turns out I found out from my coworkers, he's just like this to anybody who's new, that you don't get this guy's respect until you prove yourself. And once you've proved yourself, then he stops with the comments like that. So my coworkers really shed some light on that. I didn't even have to go to them. They came to me because they knew that this guy was a pain and could get you feeling down. And so that was really great that my coworkers stepped forward and supported me on that. So that really helped me, Q-tip, to know that, you know, maybe he said something that's a little jerky. Maybe he can be a jerk at times, but that's just the way he is. And he says this to everybody, and it will go away over time. That was really reassuring. Could I talk to him about it? That would have been really tough to confront him. And I didn't know him very well, but I guess if it had continued to be a problem, that would have been a next step. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then just what from that experience was useful to me that I could take from that. And, okay, well, this guy's kind of proud, this guy's kind of arrogant. Maybe that's helpful for me to know as I'm interacting with him what his style is and what he's going to be able to hear from me, or what's going to work well for me in interacting with him. Okay. All right, so picking up a little more on, you know, should I have talked to him about it, or how would I have done that? You know, I could have, you know, let it get to me, brooded over it, whatever, and tried to adjust so that he didn't make comments like that anymore. And that's the kind of situation where I've spent a lot of time in coaching with people where there are situations like that, and they don't know what to do about it, and they don't want to say anything to draw attention to it. They just want it to go away and get better, and they're not sure what to do. So, you know, say someone keeps interrupting them in meetings. That happens a lot, especially if it's your manager and your manager is interrupting you. How do you handle that? A lot of the times people don't have enough information about why the person is doing what they're doing or why things are happening the way they're happening, and it's easy for us to assume the worst. You know, that it's because, you know, he's interrupting me because he doesn't think that my input is valuable, or, you know, you can really get down on yourself about that. And you try to adjust how you're operating so that things turn out better, but they keep happening. And there's a lot of emotional energy can be wasted by people in situations like this. And I have an example that this kind of situation reminds me of when I was in computer camp in high school, programming on Commodore 64s. My gray hair, do you see it? There was a girl at camp who had this game where she pretended she had a pot, like she was doing a witch's brew, and she had a cauldron. And she would say, okay, I'm throwing in a flower, a leaf, a pencil, and I see Ashley. Or she'd throw in, some random things and stir it, and she'd say somebody's name. And so the game was to figure out what algorithm she used to say that person's name. So to figure out what she was doing. And so I sat there and I watched and observed this very quietly, trying to figure it out. And I noticed after, she'd done it like 10 times, she was saying the names of everybody there except for me. She never said my name. And I didn't know why. I thought maybe she didn't like me. Maybe, I was a geek among geeks and she was just trying to leave me out or something. I don't know, I was in high school. But it turns out that the rule was she would say the name of the person who spoke last. So I was sitting there quietly, trying not to interfere, but observing. And by my own, inaction, I caused her never to say my name, and then I felt bad. And it turned out that I didn't know it, but I didn't know the rules of the game. And I was getting down on myself, but it turns out that it was always within my control. If I had participated more fully, that she would have called my name. So it's kind of ironic. So, that seems symbolic to me of what this kind of overanalysis situation can be. I didn't have enough data. I made some assumptions. I got down on myself about something that really could have been different if I had acted differently. It was just I didn't know the rules, right? In this case, that was the point, that you didn't know the rule. All right, so there's a standard way of approaching people. So in this case, I could have, if it was a real life situation, I could have said, well, it made me feel bad when you didn't ever say my name. Why is that? And whatever. She could have explained the rule to me eventually. But a friend of mine calls this the quantum physics response. When you do X, I feel Y, is the response to give. So let me back up a little bit. Say somebody's interrupting you a lot in meetings, and you need to talk to that person because they're getting in your way. You can't just Q-tip. You have to actually confront the person. You would go up to them and you would say, well, when you interrupt me in meetings, I feel like you're not valuing my input. Something like that, okay? And the idea is that you're observing something that happened. I noticed that you interrupted me 3 times during this meeting or so on. You're observing what happened factually, and then you're stating what your reaction is. And by doing that, the reason that my friend calls this a quantum physics response is you're observing it, and you may actually change that person's behavior in the future just by having said that statement. Regardless of where it goes, that conversation goes, by observing it, you may change the dynamic because you're shedding light on what your experience is that they might not have been thinking about. Okay? So by observing it, you're changing it. But you want to give them an out. You want to say, well, I know you're really excited about this project. Maybe you just didn't realize what you were doing, but this bothers me. So you're not coming up to them and saying, you're such a jerk. Why do you always interrupt me in meetings? You're going to get their backs up, right? You don't want to confront people that way. You want to give them a way to get out of the situation gracefully, yet still know what your perspective is. You can ask them to clarify, was that why, or was there some other reason why you kept interrupting me? Ask them, maybe there was some other reason that would make sense to you. Maybe, they were in a rush and wanted to make sure the point got in quickly or something. There could have been something else going on. It's possible. And talk about next time. So next time you're in a meeting and the person interrupts you, they're going to try not to interrupt you, hopefully, and they interrupt you, how are you going to handle it? Are you going to agree that you're going to kick them under the table, or give them a sign, or say, please let me finish my point, and then he's got to listen at that point, however you agree to handle it in the future. But you really should try to look forward. Well, this is a pattern. It's hard to break a pattern. How are we going to break it? And if it continues, then you may have to start documenting it or escalating it in some way. But this is just a standard way for people to have those hard conversations, but starting off with a very factual, calm approach to it that people are open to. All right, so those were my first two observations of challenges that my clients have faced. The third one is perhaps the most obvious. Sometimes women feel isolated, especially if they're the only woman in a group, in their work group. They may feel that there's no one there who can do, I don't know, you chat with in the bathroom or whatever. Obviously you could feel alone. But in addition to feeling alone, a lot of women also feel like outsiders. Like not only are they by themselves without close friends in the group, but everybody else is close friends without you, and you're being left out. A lot of times they won't ask for help, they won't reach out to these people, they feel separate from them, like they can't connect with those people in a meaningful way, or can't show any vulnerability by asking for help. And also, often women, I, as a working mom, I was always pushed for time. I was work. I didn't want to make the time to reach out and socialize with people and build relationships with people because I had to run home and make dinner for my kids or whatever. So, part of that feeling comfortable reaching out has to do with valuing the relationships that you have with your coworkers and the informal time getting to know them. So some other reasons why this happens. Sometimes we just want to prove ourselves. We don't want to ask them for help, but you want to prove, as a woman, I can do this, I can meet this challenge, and I'm going to do it, myself independently. And so that contributes to a feeling of isolation. We don't want to bother others, challenge the status quo, the culture that's already there. Don't want to expose any vulnerability. Oh, I didn't really know Python that well, but I don't want them to know that because then they'll pick on me about it or something. And which really underneath that is not trusting your coworkers to show vulnerability to them and in the expectation that they will help you rather than criticize you for it. And there's also this intersection of, we're women and we're techies. Techies, stereotypically tend to be loners or work well in isolation. And probably that's worked well for you in the past. In school, you could, we're all smart people here. You probably were able to get your projects done without reaching out to your coworker or your classmates to get your work done. So why change now? Why start reaching out now? Okay, so I think at Google you're pretty good with this in terms of the culture, the teamwork, and the team-based projects. That a lot of how you get things done around here is because you know people, you know the right people to go to, or you find out, and your success depends a lot on how strong your network is or how much influence you have with people. So I think at Google, compared to other places, you're probably pretty good as far as reaching out and not feeling isolated compared to other places. But it really, the thing that comes down to, for me, is really making the time. Realizing that your work is not just staring at the screen, your work is also reaching out to people, getting to know them, trusting them, asking them for help. There's also the value of networking within the company or outside in other groups, and mentoring and coaching can also help. All of those things can help you feel comfortable reaching out to people. So that was my third point. My fourth point is a lot of the women that I've coached are very humble. Humble to the point of almost doubting their abilities sometimes. And they have this frustration of, I know I'm good enough to do this work, but why aren't they giving it to me? Why did I not get on that project? Why am I not being given the kind of work that I want to get? Do they not realize that I can do it? Well, is that their fault? Part of what our jobs is letting people know what we're capable of. And that's something that's harder for women to do. I think they don't want to feel like they're bragging. Okay. So it reminded me of this quote from a book called Leading Geeks by Paul Glenn, which is a book about tech culture, trying to explain the tech organization culture to like a business person who's trying to figure out how to work with techies. And he characterizes a lot of tech organization cultures as having this weird geek dominance dynamic where the way that people demonstrate their skills is through butting heads about technical issues and sort of a one-upsmanship approach of, well, I know how to design it better, I know this language better, I can make mine faster, whatever. And it can really get nasty sometimes. But it's not personal, it's just a cultural way of establishing what you know. That people from other organizations might look at and say, well, why are they acting this way? Now, should women be doing this too? I mean, women are reluctant to butt heads as much as men do. So is this the model that we should be shooting for, to feel more comfortable with this kind of behavior? So Jim Collins says no, that's not really the way to go. Jim Collins wrote the book Good to Great, and he also had an article about level 5 leadership in the Harvard Business Review a few years back. And level 5 leadership is what he considers to be the ultimate form of leadership. It's not just a charismatic leader able to lead the troops in the future, but a level 5 leader has different qualities. So he goes into a lot of detail about those qualities, and one of them is personal humility. He did a study of many companies that had succeeded in their industry where their peers had failed, and he was trying to figure out why they succeeded, and it was because of this level 5 leadership that he identified. One of the characteristics of that leadership was personal humility, which surprised him. He thought, okay, the Jack Welches of the world, the ones with all the charisma and belief in their own abilities are the most successful. And he said, no, a lot of the best leaders really are very humble about their own abilities. Maybe there's some value in that, in the not bragging and the not beating heads with people to establish your dominance over them. So just along the lines of personal humility, the way he describes it is that it's kind of two sides to it. You're modest and willful. So there's a strength, there's a backbone behind this humility, humble and fearless. Not boastful, but quietly determined. So, the idea that he comes up with is you're sort of balancing something, knowing that you're good, but not bragging about yourself, but still pushing for what you want. And that's an art to find that balance. Another thing he talks about is being ambitious for the company, fighting for things for the better of the company rather than for yourself. He has this wonderful image of looking out the window and not in the mirror. He said level 5 leaders, when their organization succeeds at something, they look out the window and say, oh, well, the conditions were right for it. There was something out there that, helped us get here. They're not just patting themselves on the back. And when there's a problem, they look in the mirror, they say, okay, what could we have done differently? Why did this happen to us? Whereas a lot of people tend to take the easier route of, if something goes bad, look out the window and blame the conditions, the recession or the bubble burst or whatever. And then when things go well, look in the mirror and say how wonderful, and bright we are, patting themselves on the back. So it's just a different way of thinking about that humility. So I think, our challenge is to try and figure out how we can demonstrate that personal humility, but at the same time, communicate our strengths. So trying to find a balance there where we're not boastful, but we are willing to communicate what we've accomplished and get the respect and acknowledgement from others that we are as capable as we are, kind of tying back into that imposter syndrome. So there are a couple ways that you can do this in practice. One way that I've heard of is every day, one of the women who gave advice, one of the engineers, said that every day her team would have a quick 10-minute stand-up meeting where everybody said what they did yesterday and what they were planning on doing today. And so that way, in a very informal, in a very short time commitment, you can communicate your skills, your accomplishments, and everybody in the team will hear, and everyone's speaking up. So it's not like it's just the people who feel like speaking up in the meeting. Everybody has to contribute to that process. Talking informally at the water cooler, hey, I just launched this project. I'm really proud of it. I think it's going really well. It was a lot of hard work, and it's really just, you're proud of your accomplishments for the company's sake, not that you're bragging. If you don't show respect for yourself, then you're not going to be able to do that kind of thing. If you're not, if you don't have the confidence in yourself, how can you inspire others to have the confidence in you? Taking the time to build relationships, people will get to know you better and know learn about what you're able to do. Finding a way to not brag is key, so that it doesn't feel like bragging to you. And one thing you can do is also look at your resume. If you're ever doubting yourself or you feel that people don't know what you're capable of, sometimes it's helpful just to look back at your resume. I know that Google has your Google resumes available to other people, so if people are busy and you're new to a team and you want to make sure they know what you're capable of, in Google it's very easy to point them to your resume. But not a lot of companies have something that organized, so you're very lucky. But one thing in my article, in the Women in Engineering article that I mentioned earlier, I interviewed a CIO at Johnson & Johnson, and she talked about mentoring. And one of the things she does as part of her mentoring is go through the person's resume with them and rework it and really focus on their accomplishments and the impact that they have rather than just describing technical details. Take it a step further and really highlight, what was that thing that you did? What was the real accomplishment there? What was the hard part? And what impact did that work have on the company and the company's success? And she said that when she does that with people, they come out of the process feeling much more proud of themselves than they did earlier and having a different view of themselves as a successful person at the company. So she finds that to be a very valuable exercise. Okay. So the next observation is my favorite one. I call it the accommodator, and I see this with almost everybody I coach, every woman. So we tend to want to avoid conflict, and when somebody makes a request of us, we want to help them. We want to say yes. We want to do what they're asking of us. And also, if we need something and somebody can't help us, we might be more willing than men are in general to accept a no and not push harder to get that person to help us or find a way to make it happen. We might just take it on ourselves and end up being overworked and frazzled. And also, there's been a lot of research around negotiation and women being reluctant to negotiate, and that's part of the conflict avoidance. So it's very easy for women to become overwhelmed with what's on our plates. I mean, of course, men can too, but there are some aspects of that are more prevalent in women. So one of the things actually one of my clients told me about was how to prioritize your tasks, and not just putting a list, I'll give you a 1 to 3 ranking or whatever, to help you figure out what you should be doing and what you should say no to. She had gotten from John Bentley, who at the time was at Bell Labs, I believe he's at Avaya now, this Venn diagram where what you really want to be doing in terms of prioritizing your work is putting priority on the things that are in the intersections in this diagram. And so I don't know if you can see, it's 3 circles. 1 represents skill, 1 represents what you're interested in, and 1 represents the business needs. So if somebody's asking you to do something that you're not interested in doing, but there's a business need for it, maybe you should consider doing it. But ideally, you want to find something that's in the intersection of all 3 of those. Something where you have the skill and the interest and the business need. And then if you can't get that kind of work, at least try to find something that is in the intersection of 2 of the circles. And if it's only in 1 of the circles and not in the intersection, you could probably make a good argument why you're not the person for the job. Okay. Other things you can do are set limits. Say, I really find that when I'm on more than 2 projects, things just fall through the cracks. I really can't take on a 3rd project. Or, I really try to just go to only 2 conferences a year. Please don't make me go to this 3rd conference or this training. Put some limits on what worked for you by looking at, your history and what's been successful. Delegating is also another one. I know it's hard, especially if you're transitioning from an engineer to a tech lead role or a management role, to give up the need to do it all yourself, to actually give it away and trust somebody else to do it. But part of becoming a leader is learning how and when it's better to let somebody else help you out and get it done rather than doing it all yourself or feeling that you have to do it all yourself. And finally, look for opportunities to negotiate. If somebody wants you to get on to a project, say, well, okay, I really would like to help you out there and get on that project with you, but I've got these other things that are getting in the way. Maybe you can help me take some of those off of my plate or find somebody else to do it. And see if you can negotiate something that will work for everybody rather than taking on something that you feel is an undue burden on yourself. Okay, so here are the statistics, 8 or 9 times more likely. And there's a great quote from another Harvard Business Review article by one of the authors of Nice Girls Don't Ask. It said, women don't often get what they want, or often don't get what they want and deserve because they don't ask for it. So that was the not seeing, or not taking the opportunity to negotiate, or not seeing the possibility of negotiating. Okay, now why do we tend not to negotiate? We see it as a form of conflict that we want to avoid. If we ask for something for ourselves, we may damage the relationship with the person we are asking it of. So the argument goes, well, I don't want to ask them for more money for my salary because I want to start off on a good footing with people. I don't want them to think it's just about the money. Whereas the guys will say, well, they're going to expect me to negotiate for my salary. Isn't that part of the whole process? And I owe it to myself to do it, and if I get a higher salary, great. If I don't, no harm, no foul. It's just part of the hiring game. So 2 different ways of thinking about the same situation. It turns out that what they teach in business school is not to see negotiation as a conflict anyway, but to see it as a collaborative effort where 2 sides are working together. And that tends to be more of how women, when they do negotiate, how they approach it. And there was a study of 300 women executives asking them, well, how do you negotiate? How do you perform a successful negotiation? And the answer they came up with turned out was valuable for everyone, not just women or not excluding men. And what successful female executives did in general was what's called shadow negotiation. If you have something you really want to push through, the way to do it is to meet with people individually, do a lot of prep work in advance so that you can familiarize people with your ideas and your rationales, and you have an opportunity to hear what their objections are, what their concerns are. And so you're kind of building your case to the point where when you get to the actual negotiation table, you're really familiar with what they want and they know what you want. Other things that can help is sometimes we feel more comfortable negotiating on the behalf of others and not just for ourselves. It seems less selfish that way. And it can also be like a mama bear fighting for her cubs, to get more, bonus money or whatever. And also be aware of ambiguity. A lot of the space where men will negotiate and women won't is when you're not really sure what the rules are. And so the men will push the rules and see if they can get something, and you just try, where the women will say, well, I didn't know I could do that. I didn't know how the hiring process worked. Okay, so what can a manager do to help with this situation? First of all, don't just give when asked, because then you'll tend to give more to men, because men will tend to ask more. Also, let women know what is negotiable. Try to remove that ambiguity and say, look, we kind of expect you to start bucking for promotion or to start pushing, trying to negotiate for different harder projects and so on. And once women realize that that's okay to do that, they'll go ahead and do it. Because they'll realize that it's not going to threaten the relationship. It's actually okay. Okay, so now I'm at the part where I was going to talk about advice. I know it's slightly after 5, so I'm just going to run through it real quick. And if you are interested in hearing more about the stories, please feel free to send me an email. So what I found reassuring about this whole advice process that I went through with the people, as I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, was that a lot of the advice fell into those 5 categories of observation that I had talked about earlier here. And so it was really reassuring to me, and it serves as a good recap for what we've talked about here today. Okay, so as far as the imposter phenomenon, Karen Locke said the best advice she got was, you know more than they do, which is what one of her professors said to her when she was about to drop out of her engineering program. And she realized that there was just a lot of bravado by the guys about how easy it was, and it was really hard for everyone, and she was doing well. Be true to yourself, another good piece of advice. As far as overanalyzing, don't compare your insides to someone else's outsides. You know your internal motivation. You don't know other people's internal motivations. And if you start trying to spin in your head around why something happened, you may not be able to figure it out without talking to them. Sometimes face-to-face is very helpful. I'm sure Google knows that with the VCs and everything, but sometimes you get caught in email cycles, and you could really build a relationship better by stopping by in person. Don't be afraid to ask for help. That's a big one. They used to call me question lady. I would annoy people because I kept asking. I kept wanting to learn. And it's a sign of intelligence, they say, not to compliment myself here. But I love this one. Make sure people know the value of your work. So instead of thinking about speaking up and bragging about your accomplishments, think of it as part of your job is to show your value, and in addition to giving value to the company. And be your own cheerleader, because nobody else will. Your manager might occasionally, your tech lead might occasionally, but it's really not first and foremost on their minds. It's your responsibility primarily. Oh, I love this. If you want something, ask for it. Don't be a sleeping beauty. Speak up. Don't wait for it to come to you. Okay. Now my last couple of slides, it lists some of the resources that I've mentioned or that I've found valuable in coaching. I also have a list of resources up on my website. A lot of these are on there. Women Don't Ask, Negotiation and the Gender Divide is a book all about women in negotiation. Okay, and I have a website. Feel free to look it up and find out more about me, what I do, why working with a coach is valuable, and how the coaching process works. Are there any questions? Anyone out in California? Thanks for sticking with me through it, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks.